Right now, in this exact moment, you are probably surrounded by some kind of sound. A fan humming, a phone buzzing, distant traffic, or music playing in the background of your mind. Modern humans have become so afraid of true silence that most people cannot sit in a quiet room for more than a few minutes without reaching for a screen. But for most of human history, silence was not something people avoided, it was something they were trained to survive inside of. For our ancient ancestors, silence in the wrong place at the wrong time could mean a predator was near, or worse, that something sacred had gone wrong. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have found that silence carried meanings we have almost completely forgotten in the modern world. By the end of this video, you will understand why so many ancient cultures treated silence as dangerous, sacred, and deeply symbolic all at once. You will also learn what modern neuroscience is now discovering about silence, and why it might explain your own restlessness today. This is the strange, forgotten story of why ancient humans feared silence, and why your brain still remembers it. Today, silence often feels awkward, uncomfortable, or even threatening in a conversation, and most people rush to fill it. Researchers who study evolutionary psychology believe this discomfort is not random, but a survival instinct passed down from a time when silence truly could signal danger. Later in this video, I will explain how early humans on the open savanna used sound itself as a kind of early warning system. I will also explain why many indigenous cultures developed entire rituals built around controlled, intentional silence rather than avoiding it completely. And I will show you why modern scientists studying meditation and sensory deprivation are now circling back to lessons ancient shamans already understood. Many people today assume silence is simply the absence of sound, nothing more than an empty gap between noises. But for early humans living in small hunter-gatherer bands, the natural world was rarely silent unless something had changed. A sudden drop in birdsong, insect noise, or animal chatter often meant a predator was moving through the area. Anthropologists call this the landscape of sound, a constant background hum that ancient humans relied on to judge whether they were safe. Imagine a small band of early humans resting near a river as the late afternoon light fades into evening. The forest around them is alive with birds calling, insects buzzing, and the distant rustle of animals moving through the undergrowth. Suddenly, every sound stops at once, and the group freezes mid-motion, eyes scanning the tree-line for movement. For them, that unnatural silence was not peaceful at all. It was one of the most frightening sounds a human could experience. This reaction is not just ancient history, because modern neuroscience shows the human brain still processes sudden silence as a possible threat signal. Studies on the human startle response show that abrupt silence can trigger the same alertness in your nervous system as a sudden loud noise. But here is what most people don't realize. Silence was not only feared for physical danger, it was also treated as spiritually dangerous. In many ancient and indigenous cultures, silence was believed to be the space where spirits, ancestors, or unseen forces could enter the world of the living. Among many tribal societies studied by anthropologists, moments of unexpected silence during a ceremony were seen as a sign that something sacred was happening. Elders in some oral tradition cultures taught that speaking too much or too little could disturb a delicate spiritual balance within the group. This is why in many hunter-gatherer and early agricultural societies, silence was treated as something to be controlled, not something to be avoided entirely. Shamans, the spiritual guides and healers found in many indigenous cultures, often use silence deliberately as a tool rather than fearing it randomly. During healing rituals, a shaman might use long stretches of silence to create a sense of tension before a chant or drumbeat began again. Anthropological records from Siberian, Amazonian, and Central Asian tribal traditions describe silence as a doorway used to prepare the mind for altered states of consciousness. Researchers studying these practices today believe that controlled silence may have helped regulate stress hormones long before humans understood what hormones even were. There is something even stranger almost nobody talks about, and it involves the way ancient societies used silence as a form of punishment and power. In several tribal cultures documented by anthropologists, forcing a person into isolation and silence was considered one of the harshest punishments available. Being cut off from communal sound, laughter, chanting, and conversation was seen as a kind of social death long before physical death occurred. This tells us that silence was never just about noise. It was deeply tied to belonging, identity, and survival within the group. For early humans, being part of a noisy, communicating tribe meant safety, food sharing, and protection from outside threats. Losing access to that shared sound, even temporarily, could feel like losing your place in the world itself. Modern psychologists studying solitary confinement have found strikingly similar effects, including anxiety, disorientation, and a distorted sense of time. This suggests that our fear of extreme silence may be rooted in an ancient, biological memory of social exclusion meaning danger. Rites of passage, the ceremonies many cultures use to mark a person's transition into adulthood, often deliberately use silence as a controlled trial. In numerous indigenous traditions, young people were sent into the wilderness alone, told to remain silent for a set period of time as a test of endurance. This practice, sometimes called a vision quest in certain Native American traditions, was believed to strip away distraction so a deeper truth could be heard. Anthropologists suggest that these silent trials were not meant to punish young people, but to force them to listen to themselves for the first time. Imagine a teenager from an ancient community, sent alone into the hills as the sun begins to set on the first night of the ritual. There is no fire to sit beside, no voices to answer, only wind moving through dry grass and the slow beating of their own heart. At first, the silence feels unbearable, and every small sound in the darkness seems impossibly loud and threatening. But as hours pass, something shifts, and the same silence that once felt terrifying begins to feel strangely clear and focused. Many oral traditions describe this shift as the moment a person finally hears their own thoughts without the noise of daily life drowning them out. Modern researchers studying sensory deprivation report a similar pattern, where initial anxiety often gives way to heightened self-awareness after enough time passes. This ancient practice suggests that our ancestors understood something modern life has almost completely erased, that silence can be a teacher rather than only a threat. But here's what most people don't realize about daily ancient life. Complete silence was actually extremely rare in most communities. Anthropological studies of hunter-gatherer societies describe daily existence as full of near-constant low-level sound, including talking, storytelling, and communal work. Talking while working, singing while walking, and chanting during tasks were common ways ancient groups maintained social bonds throughout the day. This constant gentle background sound is sometimes called social soundscaping by researchers who study small-scale traditional societies. In this context, true silence stood out sharply, which is exactly why it carried so much emotional and spiritual weight when it occurred. Something being unusual made it meaningful, in the same way an unexpected pause in a conversation today instantly draws your attention. Modern life has flipped this pattern almost completely upside down compared to how our ancestors experienced sound and silence. Today, constant noise is the normal background of daily life, from notifications and traffic to endless streaming audio and background chatter. As a result, true silence has become the rare and unusual experience, which may explain why so many people find it unsettling rather than sacred. Neuroscientists studying modern attention spans have found that constant background noise can prevent the brain from ever fully entering a resting state. Some researchers now argue that ancient humans, through communal rituals and intentional silence, achieved something like modern meditation long before the word existed. Studies published in the last 2 decades on meditation and mindfulness show measurable reductions in stress hormones after periods of structured silence. This means the shamans, elders, and ritual leaders of ancient societies may have understood a biological truth that science is only now proving with data. They likely could not explain cortisol or the nervous system, but they clearly understood that structured silence changed how a person felt and behaved. There is something even stranger almost nobody talks about, and it involves how silence was used in ancient storytelling and oral tradition itself. In many oral tradition cultures, storytellers used deliberate pauses of silence to build tension before revealing an important twist or lesson in a story. Anthropologists studying oral storytelling techniques note that silence functioned almost like punctuation, giving listeners time to absorb what they had just heard. This means silence was not the opposite of communication for our ancestors, but an essential part of how communication actually worked. Modern public speakers and filmmakers still use this exact same technique today, even if most people never realize its ancient roots. A well-placed pause before an important line can make an audience lean forward, just as it did around ancient fires thousands of years ago. This connects directly back to why sudden, unexpected silence still grabs your attention instantly, even in a crowded modern room. Your brain is not being irrational when it reacts strongly to a sudden quiet moment. It is running code written by hundreds of thousands of years of survival. Let's bring all of this together and look at what our ancestors actually understood about silence that most of us have forgotten. For early humans, sudden silence in nature often signaled real physical danger, such as a predator moving close to the group. For many spiritual and tribal traditions, silence was seen as a doorway where the sacred and the ordinary world could meet. For elders guiding rites of passage, silence became a tool used to force young people to finally listen to their own inner voice. For storytellers around ancient fires, silence became punctuation, a way to shape emotion and meaning within spoken stories. And for entire communities, the presence of shared sound represented belonging, while extreme silence often represented isolation or exclusion. Modern science is now confirming what many of these ancient practices already understood on an intuitive level. Structured silence, when approached with intention rather than fear, appears to genuinely calm the nervous system and support mental clarity. Perhaps the deepest lesson here is that our ancestors did not simply fear silence. They respected it, and they learned how to use it wisely. In a world now filled with constant noise, notifications, and distraction, that ancient relationship with silence may be exactly what modern life is missing. The next time silence falls around you, in a room, in a conversation, or in a quiet moment alone, try not to rush to fill it. Instead, consider what many ancient cultures already knew, that within that silence, there may be something important waiting to be heard. If this journey into ancient wisdom and forgotten human knowledge fascinated you, consider subscribing so you never miss the next exploration into our shared past. There are many more forgotten practices from ancient survival, tribal ritual, and ancestral wisdom still waiting to be uncovered in future videos. If you found value in understanding why our ancestors feared and respected silence, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs a quiet moment today. Thank you for spending this time exploring the ancient past, and I will see you in the next video where another forgotten piece of human history comes back to life.